Hello, and good evening, and good morning for other people, and good afternoon for some other people as well. I'm Robert Jenkins. I'm the CEO at CloudSigma, and thank you everybody for joining. We actually have quite a few attendees from all over the world, and I'm actually joining you from India this evening, where I'm here on business. So this won't be such a long webinar, and we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So anybody that has a question, feel free to post it. There's a Q&A functionality on the right that you can use to do that, and I'll go through the questions at the end, and we can pick them up and get anything answered that if I generate any queries as I go through the presentation. So excuse me. So yeah, so this is the basic structure of the webinar, so you know what to expect. The first thing I wanted to do was just chat about some of the principles of good security that we see and sort of form part of an effective strategy in terms of having good security in the cloud. And that, as you'll see, is a combination of what the customer can do, the end user, such as yourselves, and also what the cloud provider can do. And it's kind of the joint kind of meshing of those two strategies and approaches successfully that makes a good security strategy. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll obviously show you some of the tools that you can use to enhance your own security within the cloud, and I can show that live on the web app as well that we have. And I'll show some examples also of the security measures that you don't see that as a cloud provider we use to help secure customers' computing environments behind the scenes, because there's a lot that goes on that's not publicly visible in terms of providing security, and it's hopefully interesting for you guys to understand some of those measures that we take, even though they're not readily visible. And then finally I'll talk a little bit about the roadmap in 2016, and as I said, we'll have time for questions at the end. So without further ado, we can get started. So the first thing that is worth saying about security is real security is specific. So it's about creating a tailored strategy and setup that's actually specifically designed to meet the requirements of your organization or service that you're using the cloud for. And you know that's really important. So there is no golden setting. There is no setup that you could just say that is a secure setup and then apply that to multiple customers, because the security actually comes from seeing the actual use of the infrastructure and the potential vulnerabilities, and then securing against that. And so that's why I have the picture of snowflakes. The idea is that the customer, every customer's environment is different, therefore the actual optimal or correct strategy and security setup will be different. And we definitely see that between the different customers, how they set their cloud up. And of course the idea and the principle is that you always err on the side of caution. And this comes into the sort of second major principle that we apply ourselves, and it's a good strategy to have in your own security approach, is the idea of multiple layers. Even when you think in theory you don't need it, it's actually good to have it. So I can give you an example. So the idea is that you have multiple overlapping layers of security, even if there's a lot of redundancy between those layers, which might cause you to say, well, I don't need that, but in reality you actually do. So to give you an example, you can have, for example, in the cloud, you might secure your cloud server using SSH access only, and you might even have a firewall on the machine itself. And you could say, well, in theory, it's secure as long as I keep my SSH key secure and I have a proper connection. Then, in theory, no one will be able to access that cloud server, and that's true. But the problem would be that if you had a zero-day attack, like a new vulnerability on a service that might be running on that server, someone could come in and get to that, and you could be compromised. If you took an approach where you have that same setup, but then you combine that with, for example, a hypervisor level firewall, which may simply be duplicating the type of functionality you already have on your own infrastructure. The difference is that if there's a vulnerability that's within the operating system, so there were some very well publicized Linux vulnerabilities that came out in 2015, they would, including with SSH, they wouldn't be impacted because, so for example, if you had created a firewall that locked down access over SSH to your office or a range of IPs in your office, and we'll show a little bit later about that, then even if SSH became vulnerable, assuming that nobody in your office was trying to hack into the server, you'd still be secure, even though otherwise you wouldn't. So the idea is having multiple layers with redundancy within those layers, so that if one of those layers fails for whatever reason through a vulnerability or failure of something, you still have a fallback option or multiple fallback options that keep the environment secure. So then you have obviously the various aspects of security. And one thing I wanted to say was that we obviously do our bit in terms of helping the customer secure their environment by giving you the tools and obviously making sure that our own environment and cloud operations are secure. But we can't do that alone. So really, there's a lot of things that you need to do from your side as a customer to also secure the environment to actually be effective. So long story short is that it's a collaboration, and the cloud cannot provide you a magic force field that will secure computing any more than you could do in a physical environment. There's really nothing fundamentally different about securing the cloud environment versus physical in at the kind of sort of level of principles, and therefore it's still a collaboration between you guys as customers and us as a service provider. And so obviously that's what we try and do, is create the ability to combine the two, and that obviously touches on a lot of different aspects like that are kind of like mentioned on this slide, from everything from the operational security that we employ at a cloud level, but also your operational security. We often have cloud customers who I wouldn't say often, but when the customers do get compromised, and it happens occasionally, usually it's something that's gone wrong in their procedures that have allowed access through a mistake on a firewall or something like this, and really there's we can't secure against that because we don't know what it is that you're trying to do in our infrastructure, and that's where the redundancy I mentioned comes in earlier, and also the ability to have effective security procedures on your end as well as our end. Basically, to put it another way, the security is only as good as its weakest link. So the key is to always kind of raise the level of that weakest link, and by doing that, you raise the overall security level of the setup. And then of course you have other aspects such as the user management side of things and securing that. And another thing to think about, which people don't always think about, is the actual security from an end user perspective. So if you're actually running a public facing service, and of course that's a very common use case for cloud and a public cloud like ourselves, then you need to think about how you're exposing that service publicly and securely, and securing that public interface as much as you can as well, because that's of course a very effective way for the service to be compromised. And that also doesn't just so you have the kind of the compromise where there's unauthorized access, but then you also have the whole which is an increasing way that people are using to disrupt services, is sort of denial of service type attacks. And so that's a really important aspect as well, like how are you set up to deal with denial of service attacks. And I can tell you that this isn't something that's reserved to political groups or controversial companies or any people that might have a high profile for whatever reason. We see lots of companies get DDoS that are tiny, like a online small chain of local online florists or something like this. Really, people you wouldn't expect to be the victim of this, but nowadays it's very, very common. So there are a lot of tools that are and services that are relatively inexpensive that you can use to secure that, and believe me, it's really worth it, because we, having an overview we do with so many customers, we see that customers of all types get DDoSed for reasons known and unknown. So I wanted to get more into the specifics in terms of how we secure the cloud, and then I'll also talk about the tools as I mentioned. So one of the things, we use KVM, which is the Linux hypervisor. One of the reasons we do that is it has what's called full virtualization. So that's important to be aware of, and hypervisors like Zen, for example, don't. So what that means is that every virtual machine is a freestanding entity. It doesn't rely on any shared resources in terms of the operating system. So that gives it complete isolation. So it doesn't share any credentials or any data with any other virtual machine in the cloud. And for that reason, we also can run any x86, x64 based operating system in CloudSigma, because they're like black boxes to us. We don't even know what operating system a customer has in any particular virtual machine. They're totally closed, which gives a very high level of privacy and obviously compatibility. So that's great, and then that's extended onto the network as well. So all of the network traffic is isolated. So you can test this yourself. You can go in, you can assign in the operating system, you can just assign a different IP to the VM, and you'll see that you won't suddenly start receiving someone else's traffic. In fact, you won't receive any traffic because the KVM will block that traffic if it's the wrong IP. So there's basically like a little firewall sat on the edge of every virtual machine that interrogates all the packets coming in and all the packets coming out. And it interrogates against various things like the MAC address, the IP address, etc. And if there's a mismatch, it just drops the packets. So that means that you're completely isolated. So you can see all your other virtual machines in your account, but you can't see any other the traffic for them potentially, but you can't see any other traffic in the cloud. So you kind of like have a virtual network, and you really have no ability to break out of that and see other people's traffic. So that's very important because again, some setups don't necessarily have such a secure network traffic isolation. So that's very important to be able to keep the infrastructure secure. I already mentioned, from our perspective, we don't actually have access to the VMs because there is no sort of false bottom. So customers have full root access. There's no secret access that goes underneath that. You can upload your own ISO image of a system where you have the root password, which you've never entered into CloudSigma, or with just SSH key. You'll see that runs perfectly well, and that's because we don't have access, and nor do we require it or want it. So that's really important as well, because again, some systems do have that. So that's again an important aspect, because that means that we don't the sort of threat, the insider threat from the cloud service provider is that much reduced when we don't have the ability to even gain access to the data in your VM, even if we wanted to, because we just don't have the credentials. And the other thing is that because you have full root access, there are a lot of things you can do inside the VM in terms of encryption, and we'll show you a bit later, where you can just encrypt the data and the keys can be outside the cloud, which again, even from a legal perspective, would also protect that data. So even if CloudSigma, for whatever reason, was compelled to give the data by a legal authority, and we're a Swiss company, and every cloud that we operate is operated as a separate entity. So our European cloud in Zurich is subject solely to Swiss law, and we only respond to Swiss data requests, which are actually very rare. And that's very important as well for privacy and compliance. And so, but if you encrypt the data, again, that's another level of security that on your data beyond that. So one of the things we've done is we found previously that customers were often booting up servers with a public networking interface and obviously a public IP, and because of the nature of library drives, they have a standard login credentials, and sometimes they would just get compromised immediately. It wasn't a big problem for the customer because they didn't have data there, but it was still it's not a good thing. So what we wanted to do is create a way that customers could securely access servers from the first boot, so they boot up secure. And what we did was we created and we also have a partnership with Canonical, who's the company behind Ubuntu, and they have what's called a cloud init technology, which is creating ability to do things on first initialization of a server. And we created a full SSH key management system so that for the Linux users and Unix users in our cloud, they can inject SSH keys directly into the server before it even boots up. When it boots up, those SSH keys are stored in the server, and at the same time we disable password login, and that all happens automatically. So that machine, the first time it boots up, locked down without password access and only accessible using the SSH key that you've added into the system. And that's all configurable over the API as well, so you can automate that. So I'm just going to show you that in the web app. So let me go over here and log in. So I have a lot of logins. And you'll also see that I have the two-factor authentication set up, which I'll show you later, but this is already configured on my account. So this, I'm using my phone to generate a one-time password that goes with my regular password to give me additional level of security on the account. So now we can go in and have a look. So if I go into access and security, and you'll see here there's an option called Keys Management. And here you'll see, I just got a random key that I was creating before when I was testing. But what happens is I could import a key from GitHub. So if you're a GitHub user, if I click there, you can put the username in, or multiple usernames if you have developers that you might want to import the keys, and it'll suck those keys, the public keys, into the system automatically and store them there, just from entering the username on GitHub. So that's a really neat feature if you're a GitHub user. Otherwise, you can just add a key, and you can see here I can add, I give it a name, and then I would paste in here the public SSH key, and again that's going to store that in the system. Or finally, I have the option to generate a key. Now obviously if we generate the key for you, we have the public and the private key, so it's not as secure, but for some customers that's acceptable. Otherwise, as you see here, you've got a link to generate your own SSH key independently, and then you can upload just the public key portion of that. But I can just, I could generate this key and call it webinar, and it'll generate a key pair, as you can see here. Not very secure as I'm broadcasting, so I will delete this afterwards, but it's there. And you can then, of course, download the public or the private part of that key, and you'll see that then that key is available now within my account. Now, if I go over to the server side of things, you can do a custom server, and we have an entire section here, so I could attach the webinar key, or I could attach a second key like the previous key that I had, and that then is injected on boot up. So it's a really simple way to ensure that on first boot, as I say, you have secure access. So it's a really neat way of securing your access on boot up. So another thing that we're doing, that we're rolling out, is tagging of resources. So for those of you that have used Gmail, and most people have at some point, then they have a labeling type system. It's a very similar system. It's actually being deployed onto the web app at the moment. Some of the locations have it. Zurich will have it by next week. All the other locations already have it exposed. You'll notice it in the interface appearing if you haven't seen it already. And what that allows you to do is to tag resources. So the idea of this is about eliminating human error and making it easier to organize your infrastructure to try and reduce human error, which of course is a very common source of security problems by accidental exposure. So what we can do, and obviously I'm showing the API here because it's not exposed fully in the web app yet, is you can take a server or a drive, let's say servers, or a group of servers, and then you could tag them. So you could tag them with a project. Let's call it Project X. It sounds mysterious. So we could tag those Project X, and then, as I'll show you in the next slide, you can then start controlling access to that particular set of infrastructure using the tags. So the idea is that you can create access policies, which is what I'm going to explain to you now, access control lists, and they refer to tags, not to physical infrastructure or virtual infrastructure, but tags. And so that makes it a lot easier, because then what you can do is you can create, say, Project X, and you could create a standard developer profile which gives a certain set of permissions. So you can see here, this one's called Servers ACL, and it gives permission to do certain things like list, edit, start, stop, open VNC, and that's completely customizable. So you can decide what exactly you want, and obviously create multiple policies depending on the seniority or role of that person, and then that refers to a particular tag, or name. So the idea is that anything named Servers ACL would get that, and then you grant it to a particular account. As you can see here, this is someone at CloudSigma. So the idea of that is then that if you wanted to, so you curate the tags instead of infrastructure. So once you've created those policies and you've shared that with the right people, they will then be able to interact with that infrastructure securely in a completely specific way that you have defined. And that comes back to the specificity I talked about earlier. So you can set up those policies to be particular for your organization, right down to the individual actions. So you can create, it's a little bit of time investment to do it, and we will have standard policies like as starting points, but the idea is that you can then customize that for your particular requirement. And so giving my example of Project X, what you could do is you could create a policy that would have, give someone access only to Project X, and maybe they have full control, and that could be the main lead developer or project manager of that project. And if, let's say, you needed to add more infrastructure to Project X, you could simply tag it Project X, and then automatically the access controls would flow down to that new infrastructure that you tagged. Likewise, if you wanted to remove something, you can do the same. And you can have multiple layers. So you could have a server that was called Project X, but you could also have another label that you created called database. And then you could have some of Project X could be labeled database and some other infrastructure. And then you could create a policy for your database admin who would then automatically have access to anything labeled database. And you, of course, label all the database servers database. So it's a very easy way of managing your infrastructure, and it's multifaceted. And so the idea is that you can really create a very easy, simple way to control the access across even quite large sets of infrastructure, and you can do that in a dynamic sense. So it's very easy to keep that up to date as things change within your organization. And we see this as a very important way to be able to control the access of different parts of your infrastructure to different people within the organization if you're working in a larger organization. So I talked about networking before, and obviously the public network in particular is that, is the primary attack plane, option that people have if you are running infrastructure in a public cloud and it has a public networking interface. Now, actually, it doesn't need to have a public networking interface. You can run it without that. But if you're running a public service, you need to. So what we have, and I can just flip over to the web app just to show you. If you go to networking, we have something called policies. This is common in other clouds as well, so the principles are the same. What you can do is you can create policies that actually, again, can be applied to one or more servers. And again, once you apply the policy, it will automatically, once you've applied it, if you edit that policy, it will automatically flow down to the servers. So I have one here called Office Access Only. It's a very simple, policy that allows me to limit the access to a specific IP address or a specific range of IP addresses and block everything else. And so what that does is if I apply that policy to one of my servers, and I'll show you how you can do that. Let me just create a server called webinar. I don't even need to put a drive on here, I just want to show you. So if I create that and I go to the network, I can have a public network here. I can go in and say, I want to assign, a specific IP address, so I can then make a policy against it. For this purpose, I just want to show you. I could then say I want, Office Access Only policy. I apply that policy, I boot up the server, and it's ready. And actually, I can then edit that policy, and it will automatically update the VM afterwards, even while it's running. So I can apply that policy to a lot of different infrastructures. So I could, for example, lock all access to those virtual machines at the hypervisor level to just my Office. That's one example. Actually, if we go back to the webinar, and by the way, there's no charge for any of that. It's all free. So, it's well worth using. Even if you use it just to block ports at the hypervisor level, it can stop people port scanning and doing things like that against your virtual machines. And the thing is, because it's at the hypervisor level, the traffic never gets to the VM, so it just doesn't affect you. It's filtered out at the host level, the physical box level. And so this example that I've got here, again, what this is doing, this is a typical web server type setup. So we're allowing HTTP, HTTPS connections. We're allowing SSH, but only from a specific source. So that would allow SSH access from, let's say, your Office network, and then we're letting in DNS, so it can use the internet, and then we're also dropping other connections. So this is a very simple policy, but actually just simply applying this at the hypervisor level would cut out, almost all attacking attempts, because they would simply never reach the virtual machine to even get any information about what system might be running on it. So this is free and it's available to use for everybody. So it's definitely something that's worth doing. So I mentioned that you don't need to have a private network, and so just quickly to mention, so we do have customers that use a hybrid setup. So it's possible if you're in one of the data centers where we are, or the metropolitan areas, you can actually connect into our cloud, and you can, on the network for the server, so I could actually disconnect the public server, and I could simply give it a private network assign, and then that virtual machine will now be in a private network, and it has no public IP connectivity whatsoever. And actually, if you do a private patch into our cloud, we can map that private patch into that network at the switching layer. So then you would be able to access that virtual machine, again, over entirely private connectivity. And we also have that available for the Equinix Cloud Exchange, which is also a similar way of doing that. So if you're connected into any of these Equinix Cloud Exchange locations, you can actually connect into our cloud by purchasing a Equinix Cloud Exchange VLAN. So we have these VLANs available here, and you can simply purchase one of those. You get the UUID of that VLAN, you go back to the Equinix Cloud Exchange, you can paste that UUID in, and automatically, using software-defined networking, we will map your Equinix Cloud Exchange connection through to the private network in CloudSigma. And so that gives you an ability for anyone that's in Equinix or using Equinix Cloud Exchange to securely access their all their infrastructure over private connectivity only, completely bypassing the internet. So we have a number of large customers that use us in that way, and it's well worth considering if you're using, especially for more sensitive infrastructure where you don't need necessarily any public access at all. So I mentioned the drive encryption, and actually this is something that you can do very easily because of the nature of the fact that you're encrypting. It's not something we can offer on our own library images because it would kind of defeat the object, but if you want to create your own system, which is totally possible in CloudSigma, and in the library, if you go to the library here, we have not only pre-installed systems, but you'll see we have installed CDs, and that's because many customers like to create the system from scratch, and they're completely welcome to do so. And when you do that, this is CentOS that I'm showing here, you have the option to encrypt, and many of our customers do. And if you do this, and you obviously create your own passphrase, etc., we don't have that. So the data that's on CloudSigma is entirely encrypted, and we don't see any of it. We don't see it anyway, but it's totally encrypted. So there's really nothing we could ever do to make any sense of that data that's stored in the cloud. So that's really the kind of really belt and braces highest level of data security that you can get, is simply to encrypt it yourself using your own key or passphrase. And if you do that, that's really the best way of ensuring complete privacy over your data. So, and we're very happy for customers to do that, and our system supports that because you have sole root access. So I mentioned two-factor authentication, and you saw me use that when I logged in before. And if I go into security, and you can see here, I've actually got a 1+2 phone, and that's the device I used to access before. And anybody can add this into their account. So if I go to add new device, I can give a device name. I won't do it now because I've already got a device, but I would put in my account password, and then as I've already added a device, I need to give the passcode for the current device in order to add a second one. But if you haven't already set this up, this would be missing as an option. So you'd simply add your password in again, give the device, and hit go, and you would receive a QR code in the browser that you can then scan using the device, and then the system will be set up. So it's very, very quick. It takes a couple of minutes, and it's well worth doing because you can, as I say, add multiple devices. So you can use it so that if you wanted a couple of people to access one account for whatever reason, rather than use access control policies, you can use this with different devices. It's another way of controlling access. And obviously, it's auditable who's accessing with what device. And it means that you can also revoke access very easily, because you can simply remove the device if you have multiple devices, and then that person just automatically doesn't get any access. So the two-factor authentication is definitely worth doing. We're using Google Authenticator, and they have apps for all the major operating systems. And also, you can actually, if you're using the API Direct, set up a machine-to-machine interface where you can actually do the two-factor on a machine as well in an automated setup. Obviously, it's a little bit more involved, as you might expect, but it's totally doable. And so you can still have human one-time password type access using the web app, and combine that with machine-to-machine access as well, because we have a lot of customers that use the API Direct. So another thing that's important is the notification preferences. So actually, we support the ability to have multiple profiles, multiple contact profiles, which allow you to ensure that critical emails and critical messages get to the right people. So you can actually have specific contacts within organization or groups within your organization email specific things. So we just give an example here of, like drives are going to be deleted soon, and you're going into negative balance. So it's not strictly security related, or that can be, but it's much more about preventing outages and ensuring you don't have disruption on your infrastructure. So it's worth adding always more than one profile, so that at least the more critical messages are added to maybe a second person. So if someone's on holiday for 2 weeks and they forget, and then the balance is running out or whatever it might be, someone else in the organization gets alerted, so that at least maybe they don't get all the messages all the time, but they get the critical ones in case something gets missed by the first person. So that's definitely something that's worth doing. And that's available again within the web app, and you can see here I can set up contact lists. So there's just myself here, but I could go in and I would have multiple columns if I added a new contact. So it's very easy to set up. It's free, and as I said, I know for a fact from other customers that it definitely can prevent some disruption and outages when things get dropped or employees leave or whatever it might be. So another important thing is the audit logs. So we have audit logs available, and obviously that's something that's important. You can search them, and so you can see exactly what's going on and what's being done in the account. So you can see me taking actions here when I was doing the server earlier, and various other actions that I've been doing throughout today. And so that's a full traceability, so you can go in and see between specific dates or whatever it might be, all the actions on the account. So you've got that traceability to see who's done what at what time, and that's all fully recorded, and you can see there's pages and pages of that in my account because it's a relatively old account. So again, it's important to be able to see what's going on in the account and review that every so often. So I wanted to just tell you about some of the other things that we do that you don't see, that's worth talking about. One of the things is that we separate trials and regular users, and so you don't see that. It all feels kind of automatic when you're using the system, but actually trial users and regular users are separated on physical infrastructure that's actually completely separate. The reason we do that is because if, for example, there was a serious zero-day vulnerability of the sort that we saw a couple of times in 2015, all the trial users are on completely separate boxes and infrastructure. So even in the highly unlikely event that they were able to do something and cause a problem, they would be on infrastructure which is not containing any production customer computing or data. So that basically isolates them in a kind of different silo of the cloud. And at the same time, what we do is if we're ever in a situation where there's a new vulnerability, we just shut off all the trials. So if anyone came in to then try and use that vulnerability against our cloud, they can't, because they're unable to open any new accounts. And all the trial users, as I said, are siloed away from the production customers as well. So that's kind of a step that you don't see, but that's a very important measure that we do to ensure that we're able to limit the exposure to kind of zero-day type vulnerabilities that you might have using a cloud or any system. Also, we have a DDoS, anti-DDoS. It says DDoS box, but what we really mean is anti-DDoS. We're not really creating DDoS. Anti-DDoS box in every location. And it's actually a system which we developed ourselves. It runs off the switches and the routers, and it analyzes all the incoming traffic. And we're able to detect with pretty high level of accuracy DDoS attacks when they come in, and then we're integrated upstream with the carriers, and we're able to mitigate those away from the cloud. As I say, if you're the target of a DDoS attack, the idea is that they want to flood the connection and basically make your service inaccessible. And at the same time, it can also disrupt a lot of other infrastructure in the cloud and other customers. So the idea is that we have this kind of protection layer which basically deflects away malicious traffic from the cloud. And at the same time, customers that are targets of DDoS, we have close working relationships with people like Cloudflare and Fireblade, who for pretty low cost actually can proxy the IPs, the CloudSigma IPs, and through the DNS, and actually then the traffic is not even coming to the edge network, it's actually being mitigated upstream. So we've worked closely with a number of customers that have had DDoS problems and been able to effectively mitigate them fully. But in any case, we have our own system, so if a DDoS does reach the cloud, we're able to mitigate that traffic, usually within less than a minute. And it's something that we're continuing to improve, and we're doing some upgrades to our routers and the system itself over the next couple of months in our clouds to make them more robust to even larger attacks and more sophisticated attacks. And of course, we have 24/7 operations and our development team, and we monitor all of any of the critical systems that we use and tools. We monitor for the potential vulnerabilities as they come out, and we're patching the system constantly. You don't actually see it under the hood, but we live migrate virtual machines between different physical boxes. We upgrade them. There's a lot of stuff going on that we do all the time to keep the environment secure. And then, as I said, and also we're always looking at new measures in terms of what we can do as additional steps to just give additional redundancy on the security. And of course, all the things I talked about limiting access, controlling access, all that kind of stuff, we implement ourselves for access to our own cloud and how we access and manage the clouds that we have. And finally, we're fully ISO 27001 certified as of last year, which is a reflection of all these procedures that we have in place. So that's a specific security related and security management related certification, and that covers all of the cloud operation. It also covers all of the company, so it includes all our support, all the even the sales team. So we have the whole company certified because essentially all of them are accessing or interacting with the cloud at some level. So we wanted a complete coverage of the certification. So going into 2016, some of the things we're doing, we've been rolling out new hardware. So there'll be continued improvements in performance. We've got quite a few new features coming up. We're actually doing some security related, some not. We're actually going to be exposing a migration tool, so you can actually live migrate virtual machines from physical or virtual platforms. So you could actually have, for example, a VMware private cloud, and either at a single VM level, you can install an agent, or you can install the agent on the cluster, and you can actually move some or all of the VMs from that cluster into CloudSigma while they're still running. So this is great for doing backup, and we can do business continuity with that, but you can also just live migrate virtual machine up to our cloud, and it's a really neat tool. So we'll be adding that shortly, and adding the backup and disaster recovery functionality behind that. So you can run on multiple VMs this tool, and it's syncing all the data to the cloud at whatever regularity you want. And then if you need to flip over to the cloud, you can just press a button and all those virtual machines will be spun up in CloudSigma and they're ready to go. And they include scripts to do the networking and various other things to be able to make that setup work. So that's a really cool tool, and a lot of customers have been asking for that. So that's something that we'll be able to do. And we actually have a lot of new locations that we're opening. So we just went live in Perth, Australia, which people probably didn't notice because we didn't announce it yet. We're actually going to go live in the Philippines next month. We've got 2 more locations in Europe, which I can't say where they are, but they're coming up hopefully before the end of Q1 or early Q2, and then we're adding more locations in Asia and hopefully even in Latin America later in 2016. So we really want to create a global footprint and a global network so you can deploy across all these different locations. And we're continuing to add new partnerships to increase the functionality. So one of the things we're looking at doing is adding an additional suite of PaaS services like database as a service, indexing, those kind of things, which will be added into the cloud, and object storage. So these are all functionalities we'll be adding this year, which just to be aware of. So a quick summary before we have questions that any of you might have. The first thing, as I said, was start with the principles and then work backwards. So that's kind of always how I look at the security. So what is the aim, and what are the major principles, and then craft then all the tools around those principles. So having redundancy, as I said, on all the different aspects of security, so that you can survive failure of one or more security measures that you might have and still remain secure. And then hopefully I gave an overview of some of the tools that we have, and we're adding more. And then gave you an insight into some of the things that we do on our end to keep the cloud secure. And it's really a constant battle because obviously things are changing all the time. And from our perspective as a cloud provider, it's obviously a huge focus for us. We've never had a breach and we've never had an issue, but obviously we're constantly vigilant, and that's something that we have to keep at all the time, and that's a big focus of our operations team. Okay, so hopefully gave you some interesting insight, at least into us as a cloud provider, and some of the tools that we have. I'm now going to go over to the Google Hangout, and I'll kill the screen share just to see what questions that people might have. So people said, okay, so I got one question here from somebody who's asking, so by the way, there is a Q&A functionality, so anybody that wants or is interested to ask a question, if you just use the Q&A and type in the question, then I can read that and I'll respond. I saw quite a few people have raised their hand, but it's very difficult for me to transfer control over to you and then back, so it's easier if you just ask the question in text and then I can read it out and respond to anybody. So the first question here I've got is, will the course be available on YouTube after the presentation? So maybe that person couldn't stay. If you're still there, the answer is yes. So there'll be a link sent to everybody after the presentation. And one thing I forgot to mention is that everybody who has been kind enough to attend the webinar will send a link and details with like a special offer. So there'll actually be additional. You'll get a special offer, basically, something via email shortly, which hopefully be of interest. So that was that question. Someone else has a question. Where can we get more information about the mentions DDoS box? Well, it's not really a public service in terms of the system itself. I mean, if you're interested just for yourself, because this is you have your own DDoS challenges, we'd be happy to tell you in more detail privately some of the things that we've done in terms of the integration to make that work. So the DDoS box itself is not a public-facing service to customers yet. It's something that we use at the cloud level. So you can imagine all the data streaming in. We have various lines. When we detect a DDoS attack, that's coming from a separate system that's looking at the data, and that's separate from the switches and the routers, and it has then back channels into the upstream carriers that then it's able to say, hey, this is bad traffic, stop sending this to us, and just tell the next person up the chain to stop sending it to you. And that's basically what happens, and it kind of goes back up towards the source of the attack. So that's how the DDoS box works. And if you have an interest from a more technical perspective, the best thing to do is just contact us and we can explain a little bit more how it's working. From a customer perspective, one of the things we're adding shortly is DNS management. And once we add DNS management, we will then be able to integrate into DDoS mitigation systems, so that my aim is that you can add DDoS mitigation to your cloud servers that are obviously public facing pretty easily. So the idea is that you'll just be able to tick a button in the web app and say, please, DDoS protect this. And as long as you have set up the DNS with CloudSigma, we can then upstream the support for the DDoS. So then it would mitigate everything upstream and give you protection, even higher level of protection that's specific to you. So that's coming. So we're adding the DNS management shortly. Once we have DNS management, we can do the DDoS mitigation integration. Because the reality is, when we just have IPs, we can't really do very effective DDoS mitigation ourselves. We need to have the DNS to be able to proxy IPs and do various other things that allow us to do the DDoS mitigation upstream. So someone asked, can I attach one network policy to multiple virtual machines? Yes. So I mentioned that. So the idea is that you create policies, and you can have a set of policies, and then you can apply that to one or more virtual machines. So the idea is that you might have 50 virtual machines, and you can, if you have the same policy that's relevant, you can do that. So that's definitely possible. And that's the idea of it. The idea is that you don't have to individually set up the networking policy on every virtual machine. And if something changes, so for example, you might say, oh well, for example, if you have a new office and you secured the access to only be from your offices, you might want to add a new IP range, which is the new office that you've just opened in Barcelona, for example. You could simply go into the policy, add those rules to allow traffic over the right ports that you want to accept from that IP range, and then you just basically hit save, and it will propagate out to all those servers automatically. You don't have to do anything. So again, the idea is it makes it convenient and easy to just kind of manage at a high level all the networking access without having to go into every single machine all the time and change it. You can imagine the work it would be if you had to individually change the networking setup on every single virtual machine that you might have. So someone asks, it's not security related, but it's an interesting one, which is about hardware acceleration. So it says, is hardware acceleration enabled for storage encryption in Zurich? I do not see AES-NI in the processor set. So we'd have to check if you don't see it, why you don't see it, and we can do that. We'll definitely follow up with you to do that. My email is robert@cloudsigma.com. It's not a big secret. So just email me. In principle, we do have, so let me go into the web app and I can show you something. So this is this, oh, I'm not sharing my screen, sorry. Let me share the screen quickly. Sorry. So if I go back into the web app where I was, this is the server. So actually, if you go into advanced settings, you have here something called CPU model. So the first thing to check is that you've set it to CPU, host CPU. So host CPU basically exposes all the instruction sets, in principle anyway, exposes all the instruction sets up to the virtual machine. So the idea is that you do get the benefit of all the instruction sets that are available on the CPU cores. And those, and you know, and we use Intel. If you're in Zurich, different clouds have different setups, but basically all the Intels are pretty recent. In Zurich, they're the latest V3 Intels with all the instruction sets, and they should all be flowed up. So that's kind of the media encoding, encryption, those kind of things. If you have set it to host, the other one is the KVM, and that's for compatibility reasons. So if you have a problem with the host CPU, you can switch it to KVM 64, and it's a more compatible setting. It's more tolerant to certain operating systems. So the first thing to check, just turn that off. The first thing to check is that have you got that set to host CPU? If you have, then we can investigate further to see why you're not seeing the AES, and our operations team can test to see if they're seeing it or not, depending on the operating system as well, because there could be something else there. So yeah, so I can't give you anything more specific other than, in principle, all the instruction sets should be exposed to the VM. If you don't see that instruction set, and it should be on the chips that we're using, then please email me personally, and I will get the operations team to investigate it. And it's exactly the sort of feedback that we want. You know, if there's something strange like that, then we can find it and fix it and make sure that you get a quick resolution. So people say, okay, so does encryption have any performance or cause any performance slowdown? The answer is yes. Basically, there is an overhead because it has to encrypt and decrypt on the fly. So it'll need more CPU, and it will cause a slowdown in the IOPS, the storage performance. So it really depends. I mean, everything's a trade-off, so it really depends on what you're doing. But I mean, the performance slowdown isn't that bad. I mean, it's actually it's pretty acceptable, and our performance level on storage is pretty high anyway. It's an SSD-based system, so it has, for the most part, you can say it has a pretty high level of IOPS. So most customers would find an acceptable level of performance even with encryption turned on. So that's one of the things that's one of the things that can be done. So yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. It does cause a performance overhead, but it's usually pretty acceptable in terms of the level, unless you need the absolute max IOPS, in which case you know, encryption is probably not right for you. But we do have a lot of customers that use it. We have for example, a provider of email. They like everything to be encrypted, so they can tell all their customers everything's encrypted and they have the keys. So someone asks about managing passphrases to ensure a VM can be rebooted without human intervention. Yeah, so the idea, just to explain the background of that question, if you do encrypt the host OS with a passphrase, then if for whatever reason the machine got rebooted, crashed, whatever, when that comes back up, someone needs to enter the passphrase so that it can then access all the data on the disk, because obviously it's encrypted. And because it's encrypted and secure, the passphrase is not available on the virtual machine. So in reality, what that means is that someone would log in via VNC and put in the passphrase. So that's obviously not that convenient. the encryption gives you much higher level of security, but the intervention is not necessarily ideal. So two things. The first is customers that just want a pretty simple setup and can accept the kind of hassle for the number of times that it happens. They will generally put monitoring on the virtual machine so that if the virtual machine goes down or has a problem, they're alerted, so they actually realize at the time that there's a problem and they can log in and basically enter the passphrase if needed. So obviously that's not a solution, it's a workaround. That's what many customers do that have encryption. They simply they have a very good monitoring setup on the box so that they are able to see if there are ever any issues, and they can go and recover the system with with a pretty fast turnaround time. The second thing is that you can get tools where you can basically you can do like a key exchange, so you can actually hold the key on your infrastructure so you have access, and then you can have the VM like call out to that location to get the key to decrypt, and obviously then you can just simply deny the key access if you wanted to stop using the VM or for whatever reason you didn't want to decrypt. So the answer is the way you can do it is there are a number of products, and I can, if you email me, I can send you the details. There are a number of companies that offer this ability to. I'm not sure whether they're free, but I have seen a number of solutions where you can essentially have this idea of a call out from one location to another. So the idea is you have this kind of physical access separation so that you're able to do an automatic recovery. So the idea is that the system would call out, get the key, and then would be able to successfully continue booting up, and that wouldn't need a human to do that. So that's the other way of doing it. But there's some cost to that usually because those systems are usually not free services to do. But I have seen them deployed and they do work. Okay, I'm going to take two more questions and then wrap it up because I'm conscious of time for everybody. So the one more question that someone had was, if the access control lists are done via the API only, who could help us with the setup right now if we don't use the API? Well, the answer is that two things. The first is that the access control policies will be exposed in the web app shortly, so that will allow you to, with a point-and-click type approach, to set up access control policies, access control lists from the web app. So that's not a million miles away. That's like measured in weeks, not months, in terms of our planned rollout. So tags, as you'll see, have been deployed across all the locations except Zurich, and that's the precursor to us rolling out access control policies. So the access controls will come very shortly. Then in terms of the how do you set it up now, our support team have already successfully helped a number of customers. So if you have any queries or need assistance on setting up an access control policy, they're more than willing to help you, so that they're able to so that you're able to set up a policy right now and start using it without having to wait for the web app exposure. Okay, so there's a final question, which is there an automated way to upload SSH keys into a server? So yes, it's sort of what I showed before. So you can. So there's two things. There's getting the SSH keys into your cloud account, and then there's getting the SSH keys into the server. And they're kind of two different things. So so what you do first is you would upload the public keys into your account. So you can do that as I showed on the web app, but you can also do it over the API. So there's an API call for uploading an SSH key, and you can define it, public key or private. So you can upload over the API, and once you've done that, that's there in the system, and it's assigned a UUID, like every object in our cloud. So that SSH key is then given a UUID, and then you can use that UUID to basically add it into a server. So then if you're then booting up that server, when you make that command, when you edit the server before you boot it up, you can add that SSH key into the config. And obviously you can do that for multiple keys. So the answer is you upload the keys, and then you assign them to the server, or assign multiple keys to that server before you boot it up. And then if it's one of our library images where SSH makes sense, meaning all the library images except Windows, you would then just basically see the SSH key would automatically come up. So then you would just be able to SSH in straight away, and the provisioning time is about 20 to 30 seconds from when you hit start to it being kind of booted up and available with SSH, at least for most Linux distributions. And the other thing to say about the SSH keys and SSH key management is that even if you use your own system, we actually have a blog post. If you go onto our website and go to the blog, you'll see there's a post about how to use, how to make your own bash script in Linux, and also it works in FreeBSD and the BSDs to actually use our metadata, which is what we're doing, to actually be able to pull in the SSH keys automatically. So even if you're using your own system, which you may have uploaded or installed, you can actually still use this this method to actually inject keys into your cloud service. Great. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everyone attending. I hope there was some useful information in there for people. You know, we're really interested to get feedback from customers as well. So please, if there's something, especially if it's security related, that you want to see in the product, tell us, because that's actually how most of our features come into existence, through customer feedback. And we're extremely keen on maintaining that. So we really have a strong customer feedback loop, and we want to hear from you and understand what it is you want to see next in the product. So we're very focused on that, and I personally, as the manager, ensure that, and so I'm involved in all the development sprints and reviews that we do every 2 weeks. So when I see customer feedback and then wanting specific features, then we are able to prioritize that and feed that into our business development and the coding. So it's a very real process. So any ideas that you have or questions on that, and of course especially with security, given that that's the subject of this webinar, please do email us and send us the queries, because I'd love to hear the feedback. And my email is robert@cloudsigma.com. Anyone's welcome to email me, and I do respond to everybody that emails me. So final thing is, we're going to email everybody that attended, with a thank you and a kind of special offer. And yeah, so you're welcome to have a look at that. And I thank you again for the time. Good luck with your computing in the cloud, and have a good day, everybody.